No.
Superintendent Sterling's voice echoed across the empty stadium as the star quarterback was rushed to the ER. Coach Miller watched in disbelief as cement trucks rolled onto the 50-yard line at midnight, aiming to bury a perfectly circular, brick-lined shaft before sunrise. Refusing to let the injustice stand, Miller bypassed the security tarp and rappelled into the void. He didn't find a broken sewer pipe. 30 feet below the turf, his flashlight illuminated rows of stoic, life-sized faces, over 20 authentic Terracotta Warriors, standing guard in a secret, climate-controlled vault. This wasn't a sinkhole. It was a high-stakes smuggling hub for stolen Han Dynasty relics. As Miller realized the school's administration had been fencing international treasures for decades, a heavy roar vibrated through the ceiling. The first wave of wet concrete began to pour from above, aimed directly at his head. Miller had 10 minutes to find an exit before he became a permanent part of the foundation. The stadium lights at Jefferson High didn't just illuminate the field. They buzzed with a low electric hum that you could feel in your teeth. It was a humid Tuesday night, the kind where the air feels like a damp wool blanket. Coach Miller stood on the sidelines, his whistle gripped between his teeth, watching the varsity squad run a high-intensity blitz drill. The grass was a vibrant, artificial green under the floodlights, a stark contrast to the rust-belt grit of the surrounding town. Everything was going according to the playbook, until Leo, the star quarterback, cut hard toward the 50-yard line. There was no sound of a snap or a tear. Instead, there was a hollow, wet thud, followed by a vacuum-like silence. Leo's right leg didn't just buckle, it disappeared. The ground beneath him simply ceased to exist. He went down hard, his chest hitting the turf, while his leg dangled into a dark, hungry void. The rest of the team froze. It wasn't a trip or a slip. It was as if the earth had taken a bite out of the field. Miller was moving before he even realized he'd dropped his clipboard. He skidded onto his knees beside the boy, grabbing Leo under the armpits. The kid was pale, his eyes wide with a confused sort of shock. "Don't move, Leo. Just breathe," Miller muttered, his hands steady despite the adrenaline. As he hauled the boy up, he expected to see a broken pipe or a simple sinkhole caused by a leaky sprinkler. But as Leo's mud-streaked leg cleared the hole, Miller's flashlight beam caught something that made the hair on his neck stand up. The hole was a perfect, intentional circle about 4 feet wide. This wasn't a natural collapse. The edges were reinforced with old, soot-blackened bricks laid in a tight, professional weave. As Leo scrambled back toward the sidelines, clutching his knee, a small crowd of players gathered, their hushed whispers filling the air. "Is that a well?" Someone muttered. "Nah, looks like a tunnel," another added. The gossip was instant, a ripple of nervous energy moving through the teenagers. Miller leaned over the edge, the beam of his light cutting through the rising dust. The shaft went down deep, maybe 30 feet. At the bottom, he didn't see dirt. He saw a smooth, gray concrete floor and the corner of a heavy wooden crate. The air wafting up from the hole was stone cold and smelled of stagnant water, and something metallic, like copper coins sitting in vinegar. The moment was interrupted by the heavy crunch of gravel. Superintendent Sterling's black sedan had pulled right onto the track, a move that was as arrogant as it was unusual. Sterling climbed out, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the pavement. He didn't ask if Leo was hurt. He didn't look at the medical trainer. He walked straight to the hole, his face a mask of calculated irritation. "Practice is over," Sterling announced, his voice flat and projecting authority. "Everyone off the field. Now, clear the stands." "Sterling, look at this," Miller said, gesturing to the brickwork. "This isn't a sinkhole. There's a structure down there. We need to call the fire department and a structural engineer before this whole section of the field gives way." Sterling didn't even blink. He looked Miller in the eye with a coldness that felt like a threat. "What you need to do, Miller, is follow the chain of command. This is an old maintenance access point that wasn't properly decommissioned in the 60s. It's a liability, not a tourist attraction. I've already called a private contractor. They'll be here with a load of gravel and a cement truck by midnight." The injustice of it stung. Miller had lived in this town his whole life. He knew every inch of this school, and there had never been a mention of maintenance tunnels under the 50-yard line. The haste in Sterling's voice was a red flag the size of the scoreboard. He was trying to bury this, literally and figuratively, before the sun came up. "You're going to fill a 30-foot shaft with wet cement without knowing what's at the bottom?" Miller asked, his voice rising. "That's not a repair. That's a cover-up." "It's a safety precaution," Sterling snapped. "And if you want to be on the sidelines for the homecoming game, you'll stop playing detective and start clearing your players out of here." Miller watched as a flatbed truck with no markings rolled into the stadium, its headlights blindingly bright. Two men in gray work shirts began unloading heavy rolls of reinforced mesh. They weren't the usual school maintenance guys. They moved with a quiet, synchronized efficiency that felt more like a security detail than a construction crew. As the players trudged toward the locker room, Miller lingered near the equipment shed. He saw Sterling talking low into a cell phone, his eyes darting toward the hole. The curiosity loop was locked. This wasn't about a hole in the dirt. This was about something someone had spent a lot of money to keep hidden under a high school football field. Miller waited until the stadium lights were cut, plunging the field into a thick, artificial darkness. He knew the cement trucks wouldn't be there for another few hours. He had a climbing harness in his trunk and a thirst for the truth that no threat from a superintendent could quench. He wasn't going home. He was going down. The stadium was a graveyard of shadows when Miller slipped back onto the turf. The heavy tarp the crew had draped over the hole rippled in the midnight breeze, sounding like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. He could see the faint glow of Sterling's sedan parked near the main gates, the man likely waiting for the cement trucks to arrive and finish the job. Miller didn't use his flashlight yet. He moved by instinct, his boots silent on the grass. He reached the center of the field and peeled back a corner of the plastic. The smell hit him again, stronger now, damp earth, old wood, and a sharp metallic tang that tasted like iron on his tongue. He secured his climbing line to the heavy axle of the stationary yard tractor parked nearby. He checked the harness, his fingers moving with practiced precision, a leftover habit from his years as a mountain guide. He took a deep breath, clicked on his headlamp, and stepped into the void. The descent was slow. The brickwork was slick with a fine layer of condensation, the red clay turning black in the beam of his light. As he descended, the sounds of the surface, the wind, the distant hum of the highway faded into a heavy, pressurized silence. About 20 feet down, the air temperature dropped 10 degrees. The brick shaft opened up into a wide, vaulted ceiling. This wasn't a maintenance tunnel. It was a basement, sprawling and meticulously constructed. His boots hit the concrete floor with a dull echo. Miller unclipped his line and panned his light around the room. He expected to see old boiler pipes or forgotten desks. What he saw instead made him stop breathing. Standing in neat, disciplined rows were dozens of life-sized figures made of weathered, gray-brown clay. Miller stepped closer, his light trembling. They were Terracotta Warriors, the legendary soldiers of the Chinese Han Dynasty. He'd seen pictures of these in history books, but here they were, standing in the dark beneath a small-town football field in the Midwest. There were 20 of them, perfectly preserved, their faces carved with distinct, haunting expressions of stoicism and duty. Some held wooden spears that had rotted into splinters, while others had their hands curled as if holding the reins of invisible horses. "What in the hell?" Miller whispered. The injustice of the discovery hit him like a physical blow. These weren't just artifacts. They were stolen history. This was a smuggling hub. He panned his light further into the room and saw dozens of heavy wooden crates, some pried open to reveal delicate jade carvings, ornate bronze vessels, and silk scrolls wrapped in protective plastic. This was a king's ransom of Han Dynasty relics, hidden in a place where no federal agent would ever think to look. He walked deeper into the basement, his footsteps echoing against the high ceilings. He found a makeshift office area, a folding table covered in modern shipping manifests, and a laptop. Miller picked up a stray piece of paper. It was a bill of lading for a specialty agricultural transport, signed by a shell company with an address in Hong Kong. But at the bottom of the page, in a familiar, looped handwriting, were the initials P.S. Philip Sterling. The curiosity loop was wide open now, and the truth was more disgusting than he'd imagined. The school hadn't been built over a hole. The hole had been maintained as a secret delivery point. The Project Cobalt history Sterling had hinted at was a lie to keep locals away from the site. This was a private vault for a high-end smuggling ring, using the school's construction and renovations over the decades as a cover for moving stolen international treasures. Miller felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. While the school board complained about budget cuts and the football team played with tattered jerseys, Sterling was sitting on a subterranean fortune that could have funded the entire county for a century. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the record button. He needed to document every single face of those clay soldiers, every crate of jade, and every line on those manifests. Suddenly, a loud, mechanical hum vibrated through the walls. The overhead lights, long, industrial fluorescent tubes, began to flicker and buzz. The power was being turned on from the surface. Miller looked up. High above, at the top of the shaft, the tarp was being pulled back. He saw the silhouette of a man looking down, framed against the moonlight. "I told you to go home, Miller." Sterling's voice boomed, distorted by the echo of the brick shaft. "You always had a problem with following the play-by-play. You're a thief, Sterling," Miller shouted back, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "These are national treasures. You've been using this school as a fence for stolen relics. I've got it all on camera." "You have a dead phone in a deep hole," Sterling replied, his voice chillingly calm. Miller heard a heavy, rumbling sound, the unmistakable roar of a large engine. A shadow moved across the opening above. The first cement truck had arrived. Miller scrambled toward the ladder, but it was too late. A thick gray sludge began to pour from the top of the shaft, a heavy curtain of wet concrete splashing down into the center of the room. It wasn't just gravel. It was a fast-acting industrial mix designed to set in hours. Sterling wasn't just sealing the basement. He was turning the entire facility into a tomb. "The field will be ready for the game tomorrow," Sterling said, his voice fading as he stepped away from the ledge. "And you'll be the only one who knows why the turf feels so solid." Miller looked around the room. The concrete was already beginning to spread across the floor, threatening to swallow the feet of the Terracotta Warriors. He had to find another way out, and he had to do it before the air in the basement ran out or the weight of the pour collapsed the ceiling. He remembered the ventilation maps he'd seen near the stairs in the gym. If there was a shaft for air, there was a way to the surface that didn't involve the 50-yard line. He grabbed the laptop from the table, tucking it under his arm, and sprinted toward the dark corridor at the back of the vault, the sound of the falling concrete echoing behind him like a closing door. The corridor was a narrow, claustrophobic vein of damp concrete that pulsed with the rhythmic thud of the cement pour echoing behind him. Miller's headlamp flickered, the battery struggling against the thick, stagnant air. He was breathing hard, the laptop tucked under his arm like a football as he navigated the maze of a subterranean world that shouldn't exist. He passed more crates, some half-opened, to reveal gold-threaded tapestries and bronze mirrors that shimmered in the dying light of his lamp. The injustice was a physical weight, a school built on a foundation of lies, while Sterling sat in his air-conditioned office and sold off a culture's history. The tunnel began to slope upward, the floor transitioning from smooth concrete to rough-hewn stone. Miller's lungs burned. The air was getting thinner, fouled by the dust kicked up by the falling concrete in the main chamber. He reached a heavy, iron-grated door that looked like it hadn't been opened since the Truman administration. He threw his shoulder against it, the rusted hinges screaming in a high-pitched metal-on-metal wail that seemed to vibrate through the entire mountain of earth above him. On the other side was a vertical ladder leading into a pitch-black chimney. He climbed with a desperate, frantic energy, his muscles screaming for oxygen. He could hear the muffled roar of engines above not just one cement truck now, but a fleet. Sterling was burying the evidence in a hurry. Miller reached the top of the ladder and found a heavy steel manhole cover. He braced his back against the cold iron and shoved with everything he had. It didn't budge. "Come on," he hissed, his boots slipping on the rusted rungs. He shifted his weight, driving his legs upward in a final, agonizing burst of strength. The cover shifted an inch, a sliver of cool, night air hitting his face like a miracle. He shoved again, and the plate slid aside with a heavy clink against the pavement. Miller hauled himself out, gasping for air as he realized he was in the basement of the school's old boiler room, tucked behind a wall of defunct coal furnaces. He didn't waste a second. He burst through the service doors and out into the stadium, his clothes caked in gray dust and his eyes wild. The scene on the field was a nightmare of industrial efficiency. 3 cement trucks were lined up, their chutes angled into the hole at the 50-yard line. Sterling stood at the center of the field, his arms crossed, watching the gray sludge fill the void. He looked like a man who had just won the championship. "Sterling!" Miller's voice tore through the roar of the engines. The superintendent spun around, his face draining of color as if he'd seen a ghost rising from the turf. The construction workers froze, their hands hovering over the controls of the chutes. Miller didn't stop running until he was 5 feet from the man who had tried to entomb him. He held the laptop high, the screen glowing in the harsh floodlights. "I didn't just find the hole, Philip," Miller panted, his voice vibrating with a dangerous edge. "I found the Terracotta Warriors. I found the Han Dynasty relics. And I found the shipping manifests with your signature on every single one of them." "You're trespassing, Miller," Sterling stammered, his eyes darting toward the security guards. "You've lost your mind. This is just a sinkhole." "Then why did you try to fill it while I was still down there?" Miller turned to the crew of workers. "Shut them down, now. If you pour another drop, you're all accomplices to the biggest international smuggling ring in the history of this state. The FBI is already on their way." It was a bluff the FBI hadn't been called yet, but the mention of federal agents made the drivers kill their engines. The sudden silence that fell over the stadium was deafening. Sterling looked at the laptop, then at the hole, then back at Miller. He knew the curiosity loop had finally closed around his neck. By the time the sun began to peek over the bleachers, the stadium was swarmed with black SUVs and local police. The sinkhole was no longer a maintenance issue. It was a crime scene of global proportions. Specialized archaeologists were brought in to descend into the vault, carefully extracting the clay soldiers and the jade treasures. The school was closed for a month as the federal investigation revealed that Sterling had been skimming millions from the school's maintenance fund to subsidize his smuggling operations. The legacy of Jefferson High changed overnight. The school wasn't just a place for football and algebra anymore. It became the center of a massive historical recovery effort. The basement was preserved, not as a secret vault, but as a museum and research center, bringing more funding and prestige to the town than Sterling's corruption ever could have. Coach Miller still walks out to the 50-yard line before every game. The turf there is a slightly different shade of green, a permanent scar on the field that serves as a reminder. He looks down at his feet and remembers the cold, silent eyes of the Terracotta Warriors. He knows that some secrets are too heavy to stay buried, and that the truth, much like a star quarterback, always finds a way to make the play. Don't forget to like and subscribe as we continue to uncover the hidden worlds right beneath our feet. The 50-yard line was supposed to be a place for legends, but it was hiding a billion-dollar crime. If you think there are secrets buried under your own hometown, hit that like button and subscribe to join the hunt. Drop a comment below. What's the strangest thing you've ever found in an unexpected place?